They have a funny saying in divorce. The difference between, I think, criminal law and matrimonial law is that in criminal law, you're dealing with bad people at their best. But in matrimonial law, you're dealing with good people at their worst. Welcome to Getting Divorced Without Losing Your Mind. I'm Corey Shapiro. The goal of this podcast is to help you spend less on your divorce. I want you to spend less time, less money, less energy, less emotion. I'm not doing it only for you. I have an ulterior motive. I'm doing it for you, but I'm also doing it for your children. I'm thinking about that day that's going to come about where you have a graduation, or you have a wedding. That's what I'm thinking about. And I'm thinking about actions you do now in the divorce impact those major those milestones. So that's the goal of this podcast, so you don't lose your mind. And today's episode, we're continuing our 3-part series. We're on the second part on dealing with these operators who are reactive versus an architect who's more building a foundation. And this episode, we're focusing on the worst mix, where you have 2 operators. They're just going at each other. And what do you do in that situation? Well, first of all, let me give you some words of wisdom. We are all operators at one time or the other. Even this person's an operator. Everyone's an operator. There's no gurus here. I don't even think a Zen master is going to be an operator all the time. They might have these thoughts. Maybe they don't act out the way some people do. But we all have these thoughts. That's just being human, okay? But what you could do, and here's the real change. Here's what's the real change. You can decrease how you act when you're in that reactive operator state, and you don't have to add fuel to the fire. That's the key. And what I want you to do is when you're in this operator state, I want you to be aware of it. So it's going to be shorter, not going to do as much damage, and then get back into your architect state. Okay, now when I see operators in divorce as a real world example, here's what I see: just good people. They have a funny saying in divorce. The difference between, I think, criminal law and matrimonial law is that in criminal law, you're dealing with bad people at their best. But in matrimonial law, you're dealing with good people at their worst, right? So when you're at your worst and you're dealing with something so important like custody, what could be more important than custody of your children? And you have a primary, you're the primary parent. But the other parent is not a bad parent. They're just good enough. They're good enough. They're not great. They're not bad. They're good enough. They're a normal, average parent. Now, in this type of situation, when you're dealing with a primary parent who's great, but a good enough parent, that's not generally a basis for sole custody to that primary parent. And if you ask for sole custody, even in negotiations, that average parent who maybe wasn't so involved, maybe was okay deferring to you on most things, is going to want more time and probably won't settle without a fight unless it's 50-50. And now you're like 50-50. It was never 50-50 for years. How could this be 50-50? And then you got 2 operators in a custody battle. So here's what I'm going to tell you. Now, this is a little bit of a risky move. It's not going to work every time, but it starts thinking more creatively. Okay, first, I want to get yourself out of that operator mode. And the way you do that is I want you to do nothing. That's what I want you to do. I want you to do nothing. Calm down. It might be 24 hours. It might be a week. And then once you calm down, here's what I want you to think of. Why don't we just give them, before this all starts, just ask to say, why don't we do 50-50? Or let's both have meaningful time with the children. Because here's what usually happens in those situations. That average okay parent who wasn't super involved, if you don't really push the issue, after the drama of settling everything wears off, they're going to go back to making you the primary parent because they don't really want to be the primary parent. Here's an analogy I see. When you hire someone, I have a small business and I've hired a few people over the years. Most people on the interview, they come their best selves. The first few months, the best selves. But then you get into a rhythm. And the good enough employee is not the same person they were in the beginning because now they're getting more comfortable. And that's sort of what happens with these good enough parents. They get more comfortable, not always, I don't want you to say, Corey, I did what you told me to do, and now they just want more time. People can change, things can improve, but I think you will save a lot of time and energy if you think like this, or something like this with your attorney when you're trying to resolve your divorce in a more creative way when you're in that operator role. So my message to you is this. When you're in the operator mode, do nothing. Do nothing. That's it. That's my action steps for you. It's you're triggered, you're activated. Take that 24-hour pause. Take that 1-week pause. Take that 30-day pause if you have to. And then during that pause, here's the rub. You can't just talk to your friends who are going to support a bad version of your spouse and just validate everything you say. That's not what I want you to do during your pause. What I want you to do is either, if it's really troubling, that's therapy. That's a great time for therapy to help you work through your issues. They're never going to tell you, I'm sorry, you were right. They're never going to tell you that. You're going to have to work towards that. Or do an activity that gets you out of your head. I actually just did Pilates for the first time. My wife's been talking about it for like a year and a half, and I finally went. And I was out of my head because I don't do Pilates, and I wasn't really sure what the moves were. So it has to be something different. And I think that's a good thing. It also felt that way when I learned how to snowboard the first few times. It was amazing because I was totally out of my head for those lessons. So that's what I want you to do. Do nothing in your divorce. Focus on self-care, and then do something. If it's really bad, either go to a therapist or a therapist and an activity that you're unsure about. That's going to really help you. Listen, I believe in you. I believe you're going to be able to do this. Even if you don't believe in yourself, I believe in for you. I'm Corey Shapiro. Thanks for listening.
This podcast offers general information only. It cannot replace legal advice. If you need tailored advice, contact an attorney licensed to practice in your area.